Voltaire, John Locke, Calvin and Hobbes, all sorts of people come in, and they did Renaissance. Renaissance is basically the history version of feels versus reals, and reals won, all the time. But then, some philosophers in the 1800s decided feels were better than reals, which brings me to fucking Kant. Kant looked at all the people using reals, and he wrote a big book called I'm Not Listening Because This Hurts My Feelings. He teamed up with Karl Marx. Karl Marx was this guy who didn't feel like going to work on Monday, and he wrote a big book called I'm Lazy and the Government Should Take Care of Me. These two lazy crybaby manginas inspired a bunch of other lazy crybaby manginas who set up the Frankfurt School, who recruited their team of feminists, communists, and people who care about black people, and sent them off to destroy all straight white men. Friedrich Nietzsche saw this bullshit and debunked all their YouTube videos with real atheism and science, and then their videos like-dislike ratio was terrible, which basically means none of their shit passed peer review.
Hello everyone, this is the Forgotten Furian, and I'm back for another one. Nietzsche had already met Richard Wagner in Leipzig in 1868, and later Wagner's wife, Cosima. Nietzsche admired both greatly, and during his time in Basel, he frequently visited Wagner's house in Tibouchen in Lucerne. The Wagners brought Nietzsche into their most intimate circle, including Franz Liszt, of whom Nietzsche poetically referred to as Lichitz, or the art of running after women. Nietzsche enjoyed the attention he gave to the beginning of the Bayreuth Festival. In 1870, he gave Cosima Wagner the manuscript of The Genesis of the Tragic Idea as a birthday gift. In 1872, Nietzsche published his first book, The Birth of Tragedy. However, his colleagues within his field, including Reichel, expressed little enthusiasm for the work, in which Nietzsche eschewed the classical philologic method in favor of a more speculative approach. In his polemic Philology of the Future, Ulrich von Wilhelmowitz Moellendorff dampened the book's reception and increased its notoriety. In response, Rode, then a professor at Kiel, and Wagner came to Nietzsche's defense. Nietzsche remarked freely about the isolation he felt within the philological community, and attempted unsuccessfully to transfer to a position in philosophy at Basel instead. In 1873, Nietzsche began to accumulate notes that would be posthumously published in the Philosophy in the Tragic Age of the Greeks. Between 1873 and 1876, he published 4 separate long essays: David Strauss, The Confessor and the Writer, On the Use and Abuse of History for Life, Schopenhauer as Educator, and Richard Wagner of Bayreuth. These 4 later appeared in a collected edition under the title Untimely Meditations. The essays shared the orientation of a cultural critique, challenging the developing German culture along lines suggested by Schopenhauer and Wagner. During this time, in the circle of the Wagners, Nietzsche met Malwida von Meisenberg and Hans von Bülow, and also began a friendship with Paul Rée, who in 1876 influenced him into dismissing the pessimism in his earlier writings. However, he was deeply disappointed by the Bayreuth Festival of 1876, where the banality of the shows and the baseness of the public repelled him. He was also alienated by Wagner's championing of German culture, which Nietzsche felt was a contradiction in terms, as well as by Wagner's celebration of his fame among the German public. All of this contributed to Nietzsche's subsequent decision to distance himself from the Wagners. With the publication in 1878 of Human All Too Human, a book of anamorphisms ranging from metaphysics to morality to religion to gender studies, the new style of Nietzsche's work became clear, highly influenced by African spheres, thought and reality, reacting against the pessimistic philosophy of Wagner and Schopenhauer. Nietzsche's friendship with Deussen and Rode cooled as well. In 1879, after a significant decline in health, Nietzsche had to resign his position at Basel. Since childhood, various disruptive illnesses had plagued him, including moments of short-sightedness that left him nearly blind, migraine headaches, and violent indigestion. In 1868, a writing incident, the 1868 writing incident and diseases in 1870 may have aggravated these persistent conditions, which continued to affect him throughout his years at Basel, forcing him to take longer and longer holidays until regular work became impractical. Living off of his pension from Basel and aid from friends, Nietzsche traveled frequently to find climates more conducive to his health and lived until 1889 as an independent author in different cities. He spent many summers in Silas Maria near St. Moritz in Switzerland. He spent his winters in Italian cities of Genoa, Rapallo, and Turin, and the French city of Nice. In 1881, when France occupied Tunisia, he planned to travel to Tunis to view Europe from the outside, but later abandoned that idea, probably for health reasons. Nietzsche occasionally turned to Nuremberg to visit his family, and especially during this time, he and his sister had repeated periods of conflict and reconciliation. While in Genoa, Nietzsche's failing eyesight prompted him to explore the use of typewriters as a means of continuing to write. He is also known to have tried the Hansen writing ball, a contemporary typewriter device. In the end, a past student of his, Heinrich Koselnitz, or Peter Gast, became a sort of private secretary to Nietzsche. In 1876, Gast transcribed the crabbed, nearly unintelligible handwriting of Nietzsche for the first time with Richard Wagner in Beirut. He subsequently transcribed and proofread the galleys for almost all of Nietzsche's work from then on. On at least one occasion, on the 23rd of February of 1880, the usually broke Gast received 200 marks from their mutual friend Paul Ray. Gast was one of the very few friends Nietzsche allowed to criticize him. In responding most enthusiastically to Thus Spoke the Zarathustra, Gast did feel it necessary to point out that what were described as superfluous people were in fact quite necessary. He went on to list the number of people, Epicurus for example, had to rely on even to supply his simple diet of goat cheese. To the end of his life, Gast and Overbeck remained consistently faithful friends. Marwida von Meisenberg remained like a motherly patron, even outside of the Wagner circle. Soon, Nietzsche made contact with the music critic Karl Fuchs. Nietzsche stood at the beginning of his most productive period. Beginning with Human, All Too Human, in 1878, Nietzsche published one book or one major section of a book each year until 1888, his last year of writing. That year, he completed 5. In 1882, Nietzsche published the first part of The Gay Science. That year, he also met Lou Andreas Salom through Marwida von Meisenberg and Paul Ray. Nietzsche and Salom spent the summer together in Kattenburg and Thurigala, often with Nietzsche's sister Elizabeth as a chaperone. Nietzsche, however, regarded Salom less as an equal partner than as a gifted student. Salom reports that he asked her to marry him on 3 separate occasions, and that she refused, though the reliability of her reports of events has come into question. Nietzsche's relationship with Ray and Salom broke up in the winter of 1882 to 1883, partially because of intrigues conducted by Elizabeth. The trio had plans to establish an educational commune within an abandoned monastery, but the idea was abandoned. Amidst renewed bouts of illness, living in near isolation after a falling out with his mother and sister regarding Salom, Nietzsche fled to Rapallo, where he wrote the first part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra in only 10 days. By 1882, Nietzsche was taking huge doses of opium but was still having trouble sleeping. In 1883, while staying in Nice, he was writing out his own prescriptions for the sedative chloral hydrate, signing them as Dr. Nietzsche. After severing his philosophical ties with Schopenhauer, who was long dead and never met Nietzsche, and his social ties with Wagner, Nietzsche had few remaining friends. Now with this new style of Zarathustra, his work became even more alienating, and the market received it only to the degree required by politeness. Nietzsche recognized this and maintained his solitude, though he often complained about it. His books remained largely unsold. In 1885, he printed out only 40 copies of the fourth part of Thus Spoke Zarathustra and distributed only a fraction of these amongst close friends, including Helen von Duskowitz. In 1883, he tried and failed to obtain a lecturing post at the University of Leipzig. It was made clear to him that, in view of his attitude toward Christianity and his concept of God, he had become effectively unemployable at any German university. The subsequent feelings of revenge and resentment embittered him, and hence my rage, since I have grasped in the broadest possible sense that wretched means the depreciation of my character, of my good name, and of my aims, suffice to take from me the trust of, and therewith the possibility of obtaining pupils. In 1886, Nietzsche broke with his publisher Ernst Scheimitzer, disgusted by his anti-Semitic opinions. Nietzsche saw his own writings as completely buried and inexhumable in this anti-Semitic dump of Scheimitzer, associating the publisher with a movement that should be utterly rejected with cold contempt by every sensible mind. He then printed Beyond Good and Evil at his own expense. He also acquired the publication rights for his earlier works. Over the next year, issued a second editions of Birth of Tragedy, Human All Too Human, Daybreak, and The Gay Science with new prefaces, placing the body of his work in a more comprehensive perspective. Thereafter, he saw his work as completed for a time and hoped that soon a readership would develop. In fact, interest in Nietzsche's thought did increase at this time, if rather slowly and hardly perceptible to him. During these years, Nietzsche met Meta von Salis, Karl Spitteler, and Gottfried Keller. In 1886, his sister Elizabeth married anti-Semite Bernard Forrester and traveled to Paraguay to found Nueva Germania, a Germanic colony, a plan Nietzsche responded to with mocking laughter. Through correspondence, Nietzsche's relationship with Elizabeth continued through cycles of conflict and reconciliation, but they met again only after his collapse. He continued to have frequent and painful attacks of illness, which made prolonged work impossible. This concludes the fifth installment of my own personal account, a groundwork, if I may, for the works of a matriarchal male of the Nietzschean scale, namely the one, but not only, Mommy's special Ubermensch.
The train was supposed to be stopped, not destroyed.
Psalm 14, to the chief musician, a psalm of David. The fool hath said in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. They have done abominable works. There is none that doeth good. The Lord looketh down from heaven upon the children of men to see if there were any that did understand and seek God. They are all gone aside. They are altogether become filthy. There is none that doeth good, no, not one.